and then he moaned again, and his eyes closed. The girl thrust Jolly Roger back. "No, you better not go far, and you better wait," she said, and there was an unspoken thing in the dark glow of her eyes that made him think of Nada on that day when she told him how Jed Hawkins had struck her in the cabin at Cragg's Ridge. That night Jolly Roger made his camp close to the mouth of the Limping Moose. And for 3 days thereafter his trail led only between this camp and the cabin of old Robert Barron and his granddaughter, Giselle. All this time Cassidy was telling things in a fever. He talked a great deal about Jolly Roger. And the girl, nursing him night and day, with scarcely a wink of sleep between, came to believe they had been great comrades, and had been inseparable for a long time. Even then she would not let McKay take her place at Cassidy's side. The third day she started him off for a post 60 miles away to get a fresh supply of bandages and medicines. It was evening, 3 days later, when Jolly Roger and Peter returned. The windows of the cabin were brightly lighted, and McKay came up to one of these windows and looked in. Cassidy was bolstered up in his cot. He was very much alive, and on the floor at his side, sitting on a bear rug, was the girl. A lump rose in Jolly Roger's throat. Quietly he placed the bundle which he had brought from the post close up against the door, and knocked. When Giselle opened it he had disappeared into darkness with Peter at his heels. The next morning he found old Robert and said to him, "I'm restless, and I'm going to move a little. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Tell Cassidy that, will you?" 10 minutes later he was paddling up the shore of Wollaston, and for a week thereafter he haunted the creeks and inlets, always on the move. Peter saw him growing thinner each day. There was less and less of cheer in his voice, seldom a smile on his lips, and never did his laugh ring out as of old. Peter tried to understand, and Jolly Roger talked to him, but not in the old happy way. "We might have finished him and got rid of him for good," he said to Peter one chilly night beside their campfire. "But we couldn't, just like we couldn't have brought Nada up here with us. And we're going back. I'm going to keep that promise. We're going back, Peter, if we hang for it." And Jolly Roger's jaw would set grimly as he measured the time between. The 10th day came, and he set out for the mouth of the Canoe River. On the afternoon of the 12th he paddled slowly into Limping Moose Creek. Without any reason, he looked at his watch when he started for old Robert's cabin. It was 4 o'clock. He was 2 days ahead of his promise, and there was a bit of satisfaction in that. There was an odd thumping at his heart. He had faith in Cassidy, a belief that the Irishman would call their affair a draw, and tell him to take another chance in the big open. He was the sort of man to live up to the letter of a wager when it was honestly made. But if he didn't... Jolly Roger paused long enough to take the cartridges from his gun. There would be no more shooting on his part. The mellow autumn sun was flooding the open door of the cabin when he came up. He heard laughter. It was Giselle. She was talking, too. And then he heard a man's voice, and from far off to his right came the chopping of an axe. Old Robert was at work. Giselle and Cassidy were at home. He stepped up to the door, coughing to give notice of his approach. And then suddenly he stopped, staring thunderstruck at what was happening within. Terence Cassidy was sitting in a big chair. The girl was behind him. Her white arms were around his neck, her face was bent down, her lips were kissing him. In an instant Cassidy's eyes had caught him. "Come in!" he cried, so suddenly and so loudly that it startled the girl. "McKay, come in!" Jolly Roger entered, and the girl stood up straight behind Cassidy's chair, her cheeks aflame and her eyes filled with the glow of the sunset. And Terence Cassidy was grinning in that old triumphant way as he leaned forward in his chair, gripping the arms of it with both hands. "McKay, you've lost!" he cried. "I'm the winner!" In the same moment he took the girl's hand and drew her from behind his chair. "Giselle, do as you said you were going to do. Prove to him that I've won." Slowly she came to Jolly Roger. Her cheeks were like the red of the sunset. Her eyes were flaming. Her lips were parted. And dumbly he waited and wondered until she stood close to him. Then, swiftly, her arms were around his neck, and she kissed him. In an instant she was back on her knees at the wounded man's side, her burning face hidden against him, and Cassidy was laughing and holding out both hands to McKay. "McKay, Roger McKay, I want you to meet Mrs. Terence Cassidy, my wife," he said. And the girl raised her face so that her shining eyes were on Jolly Roger. Still dumbly he stood where he was. "The missioner from Du Brochet was here yesterday and married us," he heard Cassidy saying. "And we've written out my resignation together, old man. We've both won. I thank God you put that bullet into me down on the shore, for it's brought me paradise. And here's my hand on it, McKay, forever and ever." Half an hour later, when McKay stumbled out into the forest trail again, his eyes were blinded by tears and his heart choked by a new hope as big as the world itself. Yellow Bird was right, and God must have been with her that night when her soul went to commune with Nada's. For Yellow Bird had proved herself again. And now he believed her. He believed in the world again. He believed in love and happiness and the glory of life, and as he went down the narrow trail to his canoe, with Peter close behind him, his heart was crying out Nada's name and Yellow Bird's promise that sometime, somewhere, they two would find happiness together, as Giselle and Terence Cassidy had found it. And Peter heard the chopping of the distant axe, and the song of birds, and the chattering of squirrels, but thrilling his soul most of all was the voice of his master, the old voice, the glad voice, the voice he had first learned to love at Cragg's Ridge in the days of blue violets and red strawberries, when Nada had filled his world. End of chapter 12. Recording by Roger Moline.